The text message blinked on the dashboard screen of a bulletproof Mercedes. "Come get me." 3 words, sent at 2:14 a.m. Not from a rival boss, not from a restless mistress. It was from Chloe, his quiet, terrifyingly competent assistant who barely looked him in the eye during daylight hours. Dominic should have ignored it. He should have dispatched a driver. Instead, he slammed his foot on the gas. 10 minutes later, he wasn't the ruthless head of the city's most feared syndicate. He was just a man standing in the rain at her door. Chloe Bennett had perfected the art of occupying negative space. In the sprawling, glass-walled penthouse of Russo Holdings, survival depended on it. She walked close to the walls, spoke in a register that barely disturbed the ambient hum of the air conditioning, and dressed in professional shades of slate, oatmeal, and navy. She was a ghost who brewed excellent espresso, anticipated scheduling conflicts before they materialized, and never, ever asked questions about the men with bruised knuckles who occasionally bypassed the receptionist to enter her boss's office. Her boss, Dominic Russo. To the financial press, he was a real estate magnate who had inherited a crumbling empire and turned it into a monolith. To the people who occupied the lower floors of the building, he was a strict, unsmiling CEO. But from Chloe's desk, situated just 12 feet from his reinforced mahogany door, the reality was starker. She saw the way seasoned lawyers sweated through their tailored shirts when Dominic simply stopped talking and stared at them. She noticed that his impeccably tailored suits hid the heavy, unnatural lines of a shoulder holster. She observed the way he calculated the exits whenever they attended an off-site meeting, his dark eyes categorizing every waiter, every valet, every pedestrian as a potential threat. He was a dangerous man. Chloe knew this in the marrow of her bones, but strangely, in the 6 months she had managed his life, he had never been dangerous to her. "You missed a comma on page 4 of the zoning proposal," Dominic said. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The office was quiet. Chloe stood beside his desk, holding a leather-bound folder against her chest like a shield. Dominic didn't look up from the blueprints spread across his desk. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of accusation, simply stating a fact. "I apologize, Mr. Russo," Chloe said softly. "I'll have it reprinted." Dominic finally looked up. His eyes were the color of bitter chocolate, sharp and entirely unreadable. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. For Chloe, those 3 seconds always felt like standing too close to the edge of a subway platform when the express train rushed past, a physical pressure pushing against her chest. "Don't waste the paper," he murmured, picking up a heavy gold pen. With a single, sharp stroke, he slashed a comma into the document. "Just don't do it again." "Yes, Mr. Russo." She turned to leave, her flats making no sound on the thick carpet. "Chloe." She stopped, her hand hovering over the brass doorknob. "Yes? There's a car waiting for you downstairs. It's raining. Don't walk to the subway." He was already back to his blueprints. Chloe swallowed, the unexpected weight of his observation sitting heavy in her throat. He wasn't looking at her, but he knew she didn't have an umbrella today. He knew her routine. "Thank you, Mr. Russo," she managed to say, stepping out and pulling the door shut behind her. She leaned against the cool wall of her cubicle, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She told herself it was just a boss ensuring his employee didn't get sick and miss work. It was efficiency. It wasn't care. Dominic Russo didn't deal in care. He dealt in leverage, property, and power. But Friday came, and the carefully constructed walls of Chloe's quiet life began to crack. It started with Jessica from accounting. Jessica was loud, wore too much perfume, and possessed a relentless determination to fix Chloe's non-existent social life. "You are coming out with us tonight," Jessica declared, dropping a stack of invoices on Chloe's desk at 4:45 p.m. "No excuses. It's my birthday. We're going to the Neon Moth. You need a drink. You look like you're wound tight enough to snap." Chloe instinctively glanced towards the mahogany door. Closed. "Jessica, I really have to organize the quarterly. The quarterly files can wait until Monday. You're coming. Wear something that doesn't look like you're about to attend a corporate funeral." Chloe didn't have the energy to fight. The week had been brutal. Dominic had been in back-to-back meetings with men who spoke in hushed, angry Italian. The tension in the office had been so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Maybe a drink was a good idea. Maybe she just needed to remember what it was like to be 24 and normal, instead of 24 and perpetually terrified of making a typo for a Mafia boss. The Neon Moth was a mistake. It was a subterranean club that smelled of stale beer, cheap citrus floor cleaner, and sweat. The bass from the speakers didn't just hurt Chloe's ears. It rattled her teeth and made her ribs vibrate uncomfortably. She sat on a sticky leather stool at the corner of a curved bar, nursing a vodka cranberry that tasted entirely like cranberry juice and regret. Jessica and the rest of the accounting team had abandoned her for the dance floor 40 minutes ago. Chloe was wearing her version of going out clothes, dark jeans and a black silk blouse she usually wore under blazers. She felt entirely exposed. She checked her phone. 1:15 a.m. battery at 12%. "Can I buy you another one of those?" The voice was loud, cutting through the heavy bass. Chloe flinched, turning to see a man leaning against the bar next to her. He was large, his face flushed with alcohol, his eyes glassy and entirely too focused on her. He smelled like sour mash whiskey. "No, thank you," Chloe said softly, turning her body away from him. "I'm just leaving." "Come on, you look miserable," the man insisted, sliding closer. His elbow brushed her arm. Chloe recoiled, her skin crawling. "Let me cheer you up. What's your name?" "I said no," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She hated that it trembled. She hated that she couldn't summon the cold, flat authority she saw Dominic use every day. She grabbed her small purse and slid off the stool. The man stepped into her path. "Don't be a bitch," he slurred, reaching out and wrapping a heavy hand around her wrist. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Chloe's chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She yanked her arm back with all her strength. "Don't touch me!" she gasped. He let go, surprised by her sudden violence, holding his hands up in mock surrender. All right, crazy. Keep your shirt on." Chloe didn't wait. She turned and pushed her way through the dense, sweaty crowd, her breathing shallow and fast. She needed air. She needed to be out of this basement. She shoved open the heavy metal exit doors and stumbled out into the alley behind the club. The cold hit her like a physical blow. It was pouring. A relentless, freezing Chicago downpour that instantly soaked through her silk blouse, plastering it to her skin. The alley was dark, illuminated only by a flickering yellow streetlight at the far end. She shivered violently, backing up against the damp brick wall of the building to try and find some shelter beneath a narrow awning. She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out her phone. 8%. She needed an Uber. She opened the app, but her fingers were wet and trembling so badly she kept hitting the wrong letters. The screen blurred. Tears of frustration and lingering fear pricked her eyes. The app froze, the loading circle spinning endlessly as the brick buildings blocked the cellular signal. A heavy metal door banged open down the alley. Chloe froze. A figure stepped out into the rain. It was the man from the bar. He lit a cigarette, the brief flare of the lighter illuminating his flushed face. He looked down the alley, his eyes squinting in the gloom. He was looking for her. Pure, unadulterated terror seized Chloe's throat. She couldn't breathe. She backed further into the shadows, her hands desperately gripping her phone. She abandoned the Ride app and opened her text messages. She needed to text Jessica. Or her brother, David. Anyone. Her wet thumb slipped across the glass screen. She didn't look at the contact name. She just opened the most recent thread, the one sitting at the top of her list from earlier that afternoon when she had confirmed a dinner reservation. She typed fast, uncaring about punctuation, fueled by blind panic. "Come get me, please. I'm scared." She hit send. She hit the little plus icon and dropped her location pin. Send. Only after the little green bubble appeared did she look up at the top of the screen. Dominic Russo. Chloe's stomach dropped out of her body. The air left her lungs in a rush. She stared at the screen, horrified. She had just drunk texted the head of the Russo syndicate at 2 a.m, demanding he come pick her up like he was her personal chauffeur. She frantically tapped the message, trying to find an unsend button, trying to delete it, but the little delivered text appeared beneath the pin. Then, almost instantly, it changed to read. Her phone screen flickered, went black, and died. "Well, well." Chloe snapped her head up. The man from the bar had spotted her. He dropped his cigarette into the puddles, walking slowly toward her, his boots splashing in the water. "Looks like your friends left you," he said, his voice echoing off the wet brick. Chloe pressed herself flat against the wall, her dead phone clutched in her hand like a useless rock. "Stay away from me," she whispered. "I'm just trying to make sure you get home safe." He sneered, closing the distance. He was 10 feet away. 5 feet. Chloe closed her eyes, bracing herself, a sob building in her throat. Across the city, in a soundproof basement beneath a high-end import warehouse, Dominic Russo was washing blood off his hands. It wasn't his blood. He stood at a deep steel sink, the water running scalding hot, methodically scrubbing his knuckles with a rough brush. Behind him, the room was quiet, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of a man tied to a steel chair. The interrogation had been tedious, but successful. The stolen shipment of microchips would be returned by morning. Dominic reached for a towel just as the burner phone resting on the stainless steel prep table vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times. He dried his hands slowly, a frown creasing his forehead. Very few people had this number. If it was ringing now, it meant a critical failure in the organization. He picked it up and tapped the screen. "Come get me, please. I'm scared." Location pin. The Neon Moth Alley. He stared at the contact name. Chloe. For a fraction of a second, Dominic's brain refused to process the information. Chloe, who arranged his dry cleaning and color-coded his ledgers. Chloe, who smelled faintly of vanilla and fear whenever he stood too close. Chloe, who was currently at a seedy nightclub in the worst district of the city, texting him at 2 a.m. He didn't think. The calculated, methodical coldness that defined Dominic Russo vanished, replaced by an instant, roaring surge of adrenaline. "Clean this up!" Dominic snapped over his shoulder, dropping the towel. His lieutenant, a massive man named Leo, blinked in surprise. "Boss, we haven't finished." "I said clean it up!" Dominic barked, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal edge that made Leo instantly snap his mouth shut. Dominic grabbed his suit jacket from the back of a chair and took the concrete stairs 2 at a time. He burst out into the rain-slicked parking lot, ignoring the waiting SUV and his driver. He ripped the keys to the armored Mercedes out of the valet's hand, threw himself into the driver's seat, and fired the engine. The tires screamed against the wet asphalt as he tore out into the street. 10 minutes. That was the drive time if he ignored every law of traffic. He pushed the heavy car to 80 down the rain-slicked avenues, his jaw locked so tight his teeth ached. "I'm scared." The words burned in his mind. He had spent his entire life inflicting fear. He understood it intimately. But the idea of someone inflicting it on Chloe, quiet, gentle, fragile Chloe, made a violent, uncontrollable rage claw at the inside of his chest. He took a corner hard, the heavy rear of the Mercedes fishtailing slightly before the all-wheel drive caught the pavement. He recognized the street, the Neon Moth, a bottom feeder club run by low-level dealers. He saw the alleyway on the GPS. He didn't park on the street. He turned the wheel hard, jumping the curb, and drove the heavy black Mercedes straight down the narrow alley, the high beams cutting through the torrential rain, illuminating the brick walls like a stage light. He saw her immediately. She was pressed against the wall, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, and a man was standing less than 2 feet away from her, his hand reaching out to grab her shoulder. Dominic didn't hit the brakes until the last possible second. The heavy car skidded, the bumper stopping inches from the man's knees. The man leaped back with a shout of alarm, throwing his hands up to shield his eyes from the blinding LED headlights. "Hey, watch where you're going, you crazy—" Dominic kicked his door open. He stepped out into the rain. He didn't draw the weapon sitting in his shoulder holster. He didn't need to. He walked around the front of the car, the headlights casting his tall, broad-shouldered silhouette into sharp relief. The man lowered his hands, squinting at Dominic. The angry words died in his throat. Dominic didn't say a word. He didn't yell. He just stopped 3 feet from the man and looked at him. The air in the alley seemed to drop 10 degrees. The man looked at Dominic's tailored suit, the expensive watch catching the light, the sheer predatory stillness of the way he stood. He looked at Dominic's eyes, and whatever liquid courage the man had consumed evaporated instantly. He recognized a predator when he saw one. He recognized a man who could kill him and never lose a minute of sleep over it. I was just asking if she needed help," the man stammered, taking a quick step backward, his hands raised, palms out. Dominic tilted his head a fraction of an inch. A silent command. "Leave." The man tripped over his own feet, turned, and bolted down the alley, disappearing into the rainy night without looking back. Dominic didn't watch him go. He turned his attention to Chloe. She was shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering, her eyes wide and dark in the gloom. She looked at the heavy car, and then up at him, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. "Mr. Russo," she whispered, her voice cracking. Dominic felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. Seeing her like this, shivering, terrified, completely stripped of her professional armor, did something strange to the rhythm of his heart. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. She flinched instinctively, pressing harder against the brick. Dominic stopped immediately. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if approaching a cornered, frightened animal. He reached up and shrugged off his heavy, dry wool suit jacket. He stepped into her personal space, feeling the icy cold radiating off her wet clothes, and draped the jacket over her shoulders. The heat of his body was still trapped in the silk lining. Chloe gasped softly as the heavy, warm fabric enveloped her. It smelled like him. Cedar, rain, and something dark and masculine. "Your phone is off," Dominic said. His voice was low, devoid of its usual sharp edge. It was almost gentle. "It died," she choked out, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of his jacket, pulling it tighter around herself. I didn't mean to text you. I was trying to text my friend. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bother you." She was hyperventilating, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. Dominic reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before he placed his large, warm hands on her shoulders, over the jacket. He gripped her firmly, grounding her. "Chloe, look at me." She forced her eyes up to meet his. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do," Dominic said, holding her gaze. "You called me, and I came." He didn't let go of her shoulders. He guided her away from the rough brick wall, opening the heavy passenger door of the Mercedes. The interior was warm, smelling of rich leather. "Get in," he instructed quietly. Chloe didn't argue. She climbed into the seat, sinking into the leather, drowning in his oversized coat. Dominic shut the door behind her, sealing her inside the armored, soundproof cabin. He stood in the rain for a moment longer, looking down the dark, empty alley where the man had run. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the knuckles still slightly raw from the basement. A dark, possessive thought settled into his mind, heavy and immovable as lead. No one touches her. He walked around the hood of the car, got into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The interior of the Mercedes was a fortress. The thick, bullet-resistant glass completely severed the noise of the chaotic Chicago rainstorm, leaving only the muted rhythm of the windshield wipers and the low, powerful hum of the V12 engine. Chloe sat rigid in the passenger seat. The adrenaline that had spiked in the alleyway was rapidly leaving her bloodstream, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a profound, creeping humiliation. She pulled Dominic's heavy wool suit jacket tighter around herself. It was absurdly large on her frame, the sleeves drooping past her fingertips, but the trapped heat radiating from the silk lining was the only thing stopping her violent shivering. Dominic drove in complete silence. He didn't ask her what she was doing at the Neon Moth. He didn't ask why she had stayed out so late. His focus was entirely on the slick, rain-washed streets, his large hands resting lightly on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The streetlights passing overhead cast rhythmic, strobing shadows across his profile. Chloe watched him from the corner of her eye. At the office, he was a man of intense, contained stillness. Here, behind the wheel of a heavy machine, tearing through the city at 2 a.m, that stillness felt different. It felt lethal. The muscles in his jaw were locked tight, a visible ridge of tension beneath his skin. "Address," he said quietly. Chloe blinked, realizing he was waiting for directions. "Oh, 4218 North Darman in Ravenswood." He nodded once, tapping the destination into the navigation screen. "Mr. Russo, She stopped, swallowing hard. Her throat felt raw. "I really am sorry. I was trying to reach my friend Jessica. She was at the club with me, and we got separated, and my phone—" "You don't need to explain, Chloe." His voice cut through her nervous rambling. It wasn't harsh, but it carried the absolute finality he used to end board meetings. "You were in trouble. You reached out. It's handled." "But I interrupted your night. You shouldn't have had to come down there." Dominic shifted his grip on the wheel. He thought about the basement, the blood he had washed from his hands, the cold calculus of the life he lived. He looked at the slight, trembling woman sitting next to him, swallowed up by his jacket. "I was awake," was all he said. They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they reached Ravenswood, the neighborhood was dark and quiet, the tree-lined streets a stark contrast to the grim industrial blocks of the club district. Chloe pointed to a weathered, 3-story brick walk-up. Dominic pulled the heavy car flush against the curb, directly under a street lamp. He shifted into park and killed the engine. The sudden absence of the low hum made the silence in the cabin feel heavy. Chloe fumbled with the door handle, her hands still slightly numb from the cold. "Thank you. Really, I'll have your coat dry cleaned and brought to the office on Monday." "Leave it." Dominic unbuckled his seatbelt. He pushed his door open, stepping out into the fading drizzle, and walked around the front of the car. He opened her door before she could manage the heavy latch. "I can walk up by myself." Chloe protested weakly, stepping onto the wet pavement. Her legs felt like lead. Dominic shut the car door behind her. He stood between her and the street, a solid, immovable barrier. I'm sure you can. He replied mildly, placing a hand lightly on the small of her back. I'm walking you to your door anyway. Chloe didn't have the energy to argue. The warmth of his hand penetrated the thick wool of the coat, a steadying anchor as she navigated the cracked concrete steps to the building's main entrance. She retrieved her keys from her purse, her fingers clumsy. The heavy glass door of the building was smudged and the lock stuck, requiring a specific jiggle to catch. She fought with it for 5 seconds before Dominic gently pushed her hands aside. He took the keys, inserted the brass key, applied a precise amount of upward pressure, and turned. The deadbolt gave way with a sharp click. He held the door open, his eyes sweeping the dimly lit, narrow foyer before he allowed her to step inside. They climbed 2 flights of stairs. The carpeting was worn thin, smelling faintly of old cooking oil and dust. Dominic made no sound as he walked behind her, his expensive leather shoes completely silent on the treads. At apartment 3B, Chloe unlocked her door. She pushed it open, reaching blindly for the light switch. The small living room sprang into view, neat, modest, filled with second-hand furniture and a towering stack of library books on the coffee table. She turned to face him, standing in the doorway. He was completely out of place here. He belonged in rooms with vaulted ceilings, mahogany panels, and panoramic views of the skyline. Here, in her cramped hallway, he seemed massive, taking up all the available oxygen. "Thank you," she whispered again. It felt inadequate, a tiny phrase for the sheer weight of what he had done. Dominic looked at her. His dark eyes catalogued the pale exhaustion in her face, the damp hair clinging to her neck, the way she was holding her own arms to keep from trembling. "Lock the deadbolt," he instructed, his voice low. "Put the chain on. Don't answer your door until daylight." "I won't." He lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. His hand twitched at his side, as if he wanted to reach out, to brush a wet strand of hair from her cheek. He didn't. The controls snapped back into place, rigid and unyielding. "Good night, Chloe." He turned and walked down the hall. Chloe stood in the doorway, listening to the solid, receding rhythm of his footsteps. She didn't move until she heard the heavy main door on the ground floor close behind him. She stepped inside, shut her door, slid the deadbolt home, and engaged the brass chain. Only then, standing in the quiet safety of her small apartment, wrapped in the scent of cedar and rain, did she allow herself to cry. Friday morning arrived with the subtlety of a hammer. Chloe stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6:30, holding a cold washcloth to her swollen eyes. She had slept for perhaps 3 hours, her dreams fractured with images of dark alleys and the blinding glare of headlights. Hanging over the back of a kitchen chair was Dominic's jacket. It was dry now. She ran her hand over the fine wool lapel. The reality of the previous night settled over her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. How was she supposed to walk into that office? How was she supposed to hand him his morning espresso, organize his meetings, and blend back into the negative space when he had seen her completely unraveled? She had broken the cardinal rule of her employment. She had made herself a complication. Men like Dominic Russo did not tolerate complications. They eliminated them. She dressed with mechanical precision, a high-necked slate-grey blouse, black trousers, low heels. Armor. She folded the heavy jacket carefully, draping it over her arm, and left for the subway. She arrived at Russo Holdings at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before her official start time. The sprawling penthouse suite was quiet. The cleaning crew had already finished, leaving the glass surfaces gleaming and the air smelling faintly of lemon polish. Chloe set her bag down at her desk. She looked at the mahogany door. It was slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light spilled out onto the thick carpet. He was already here. Her heart executed a slow, heavy roll against her ribs. She walked to the small executive kitchenette, her movements stiff. She ground the dark roast beans, packed the portafilter, and pulled a double shot, exactly the way he liked it. No sugar, no cream. She placed the demi-tasse cup on a small silver tray, picked up his folded jacket, and walked toward his office. She stopped outside the door, taking a slow, deep breath, trying to summon the ghost she used to be. She pushed the door open. Dominic was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the grey, overcast city. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket today. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing the corded muscle and a dark, intricate tattoo that disappeared beneath the fabric near his elbow. He didn't turn around as she entered. "Your coffee, Mr. Russo," Chloe said softly, her voice remarkably steady despite the tremor in her hands. She set the tray on the corner of his massive desk. Then she carefully laid the folded jacket over the back of one of the leather guest chairs. "Thank you." He turned. The harsh morning light caught the sharp angles of his face. He looked tired. There were faint, bruised shadows beneath his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept at all after leaving her apartment. He walked to the desk, picked up the small cup, and took a slow sip. His dark eyes locked onto hers over the rim. Chloe stood her ground, clasping her hands tightly in front of her. "I brushed out the jacket. It's completely dry. I'm sorry again for the inconvenience." "Stop apologizing, Chloe." He set the cup down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the silver tray. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet away from her. The physical space between them, which had always felt like a necessary professional barrier, now felt charged. Dense. "Are you all right?" he asked. It wasn't a pleasantry. It was an interrogation. "I'm fine," Chloe said automatically, defaulting to the polite, meaningless script of an employee. "I'm perfectly fine. The quarterly reports are ready for your review at 10, and Mr. Vane is expecting your call at—" "Chloe," he said her name with a quiet force that physically stopped her from speaking. He wasn't looking at her like a boss looking at a subordinate. He was looking at her the way he had in the alley, intense, focused, dissecting the lie. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She forced her eyes up. "You are pale. Your hands are shaking," Dominic stated, his voice dropping an octave. "You are not fine. You were cornered by a predator in an alley at 2 a.m. Being fine today would make you a sociopath." Chloe's breath hitched. The blunt truth of his words stripped away the thin veneer of professionalism she was desperately trying to maintain. The memory of the man's heavy hand on her wrist flashed in her mind, hot and suffocating. She looked down at her hands, realizing they were indeed trembling. She squeezed them tighter together. I want to forget it happened. I want things to go back to normal." "They won't." The finality in his tone made her snap her head back up. Panic flared in her chest. "Mr. Russo, please, I know I crossed a line. I know I shouldn't have involved you. If you want my resignation, I understand, but—" "Resignation?" Dominic stepped closer. The scent of him, clean soap and dark coffee, washed over her. His brow was furrowed in genuine confusion, which rapidly hardened into something resembling anger. "You think I'm firing you?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I became a liability," Chloe stammered, backing up a half step before her heels hit the edge of the thick rug. "I brought my personal mess to your door." Dominic stared at her, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He reached out, his large hand moving deliberately until his fingers wrapped gently around her upper arm. The grip was loose, entirely non-threatening, but it anchored her to the spot. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, holding her gaze, refusing to let her look away. "If you had texted anyone else last night, you might not be standing here right now. If you ever find yourself in a situation like that again, you do exactly what you did. You understand me? You call me." Chloe stared at him, entirely disarmed. "Why?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. Dominic's thumb brushed lightly against the fabric of her sleeve. The gesture was incredibly small, incredibly intimate. "Because," he said softly, "you are mine to look after." The air in the office vanished. Chloe stopped breathing. The words hung between them, heavy with a possessiveness that went far beyond an employment contract. He wasn't talking about payroll or human resources. He was claiming a territorial right to her safety. He slowly released her arm and took a step back, the professional distance re-establishing itself almost instantly. But the damage was done. The line hadn't just been crossed, it had been obliterated. "The quarterly reports," Dominic said, his tone returning to a flat, business-like cadence, as if the last 60 seconds hadn't happened. "Leave them on my desk, and cancel the 10 o'clock meeting with Vane. I have other matters to attend to." "Yes, Mr. Russo," Chloe whispered. She turned and walked out of the office, her legs feeling like hollow reeds. She sat at her desk, staring blankly at the glowing monitor. The ghost was gone. She was entirely visible to him now, and she had absolutely no idea how to survive in the light. By 5 p.m., the adrenaline of the morning confrontation had faded into a dull, persistent ache behind Chloe's eyes. She had spent the entire day executing her duties with robotic precision. Dominic had remained in his office, conducting meetings behind closed doors. They hadn't spoken since the morning. At 5:15 p.m., she began shutting down her computer. The weekend stretched ahead of her. 48 hours where she could lock herself in her apartment, order takeout, and try to process the seismic shift in her reality. She packed her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked toward the glass elevators. "Leaving." Chloe stopped. Dominic stood in the doorway of his office, his suit jacket back on, completely buttoned down. "Yes, Mr. Russo. Everything is filed for Monday." He nodded, pulling a sleek black smartphone from his pocket. "Take the private elevator down to the garage. B level." Chloe frowned, confused. "I usually just take the main bank to the lobby and walk to the blue line." "You aren't taking the train," Dominic said, stepping out of his office. He didn't look at her. He was reading an email on his screen. "Frank is waiting for you at Bay 4. He'll drive you home." Chloe stiffened. The instinct to maintain her independence, the only thing she truly owned in this city, flared up. "Mr. Russo, that's really not necessary. It's 5 in the afternoon. It's perfectly safe." Dominic stopped typing. He lowered the phone, fixing her with a stare that made her instantly regret arguing. "It's raining," he stated simply. "I brought an umbrella today." "Chloe." His voice was a low, warning rumble. "Do not argue with me about this. It's a 40-minute drive in this traffic." She pushed back, her voice remarkably steady. "It takes me 20 minutes on the train. I don't need a driver, Dominic." The use of his first name slipped out like a rogue spark in a powder keg. Silence descended on the hallway. Chloe froze, her eyes widening in horror at her own slip. No one called him Dominic. Even the men who feared him called him Mr. Russo. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't blink. He simply placed his phone back into his inner jacket pocket, closed the distance between them with 2 long strides, and stopped inches from her. Chloe tilted her head up to look at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You don't need a driver?" he asked, his voice a soft, dangerous murmur. "You think because the sun is out, the city is suddenly safe? You think the man from the alley only exists at 2 a.m.? I can't live in a bubble!" she whispered, refusing to back down, even as every instinct screamed at her to yield. "I have to commute. I have a life outside of this building." "Your life outside of this building," Dominic said, stepping even closer, forcing her to look straight up into his dark eyes, "is currently a liability. I do not leave liabilities exposed. I am an administrative assistant," she argued, her voice trembling slightly. "I am not a target." Dominic's hand came up. Chloe tensed, expecting a reprimand, but instead his knuckles brushed lightly against her cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle, a stark contrast to the harshness of his words. "You are the person who controls my schedule. You know who I meet, where I eat, and when I sleep," he said softly, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You are the gatekeeper to my entire operation. And as of last night, anyone who was paying attention in that alley knows that if you call, I come running." Chloe's breath hitched. She stared into his eyes, seeing the absolute, terrifying truth in them. He wasn't just being protective. He was stating a tactical fact. By showing up for her, he had painted a target on her back. "Frank is a trained professional," Dominic continued, dropping his hand, though he didn't step back. The heat of his body was palpable. "He is armed. He will drive you home. He will wait until you are inside your building, and he will be outside your apartment at 8 o'clock on Monday morning to bring you back. This is not a negotiation, Chloe. It is a new condition of your employment." She looked at him, realizing the cage had just been lowered. It was made of bulletproof glass and armed guards, but it was a cage nonetheless. The terrifying part wasn't the restriction. The terrifying part was the deep, shameful wave of relief that washed over her. She didn't have to look over her shoulder on the walk to the train. She didn't have to clutch her keys between her knuckles. He was taking the burden of her safety entirely onto his own shoulders. "Okay," she whispered, conceding defeat. Dominic's posture relaxed slightly, the rigid tension leaving his shoulders. "Good." He gestured toward the private elevator at the end of the hall. "Go." Chloe turned and walked toward the steel doors. She pressed the button, watching the light illuminate. Before the doors slid open, she looked back over her shoulder. Dominic was still standing there, watching her. He wasn't returning to his office. He was standing guard in the empty hallway, ensuring she got into the elevator safely. She stepped inside, the heavy doors closing, severing his gaze. As the elevator began its smooth, silent descent into the subterranean levels of the building, Chloe leaned her head back against the cool steel wall. She had spent 6 months trying to be invisible. She had succeeded in slipping beneath his radar, organizing his life from the shadows. But now he was looking directly at her. And Dominic Russo, she realized with a quiet sense of dread and dark thrill, was not a man who ever looked away once he found something he wanted to keep. The weekend stretched out like a drawn-out breath. Chloe spent Saturday pacing the short length of her apartment. Every time she approached the front window and parted the cheap, off-white blinds, the dark grey sedan was there. It sat exactly across the street, occupying a space beside a fire hydrant. Frank didn't read a newspaper. He didn't look at his phone. He just sat behind the steering wheel, his heavy silhouette a constant, immovable fixture in her periphery. It rained again on Sunday afternoon. Chloe watched the water bead and run down the windshield of Frank's car. She heated up leftover pasta in the microwave, the mechanical hum loud in the quiet apartment. She ate standing at the kitchen counter, the food tasting like ash. She was safe. The lock on her door felt redundant now, but the safety carried a distinct, heavy gravity. It was the gravity of belonging to someone who operated entirely outside the bounds of normal society. Monday morning arrived with a sharp drop in temperature. At precisely 7:50 a.m., Chloe locked her apartment door. When she pushed open the heavy glass door to the street, Frank was standing on the sidewalk. He was a man in his late 50s, built like a cinder block, wearing a suit that was functional rather than tailored. "Morning, Miss Bennett," he said. His voice was gravelly, roughened by years of cheap cigars. He opened the rear door of the sedan. "Good morning, Frank," Chloe replied, stepping into the back seat. The interior smelled of leather cleaner and wintergreen mints. The drive to the financial district was agonizingly smooth. There was no jostling for space on a crowded train carriage, no smell of wet wool from other commuters. Frank navigated the aggressive Chicago traffic with a terrifying, silent efficiency. Cars simply seemed to yield to the heavy grey sedan. When they pulled into the subterranean garage of Russo Holdings, Frank parked in Bay 4. He escorted her to the private elevator, swiped a black keycard over the reader, and waited until the steel doors closed behind her. The penthouse floor was exactly as she had left it on Friday. Cold, quiet, smelling of lemon polish. Chloe walked to her desk, set her bag down, and booted up her computer. She moved mechanically to the kitchenette to prepare the espresso. She carried the silver tray to the heavy mahogany door. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She pushed the door open. Dominic was sitting behind his desk. He wasn't looking at blueprints or financial reports. He was listening to Leo, the massive lieutenant Chloe had only seen a handful of times, usually entering through the private service elevator. Leo stopped talking the moment Chloe entered the room. Dominic leaned back in his leather chair. He wore a charcoal suit today, the tailoring impeccable, hiding the inevitable shoulder holster. His dark eyes tracked her from the doorway to the corner of his desk. "Good morning, Mr. Russo," Chloe said, setting the tray down. The porcelain cup clinked faintly. "Good morning, Chloe." His voice was a low rumble. It didn't hold the dangerous edge of Friday afternoon, but it wasn't the detached tone of her boss from a week ago, either. It was observant, heavy. She turned to leave. "Stay," Dominic instructed quietly. Chloe froze. She looked at Leo, who stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Then she looked at Dominic. She had never been asked to stay while Leo was in the room. Dominic nodded at the empty leather chair opposite his desk. "Sit down." Chloe walked over and sat, keeping her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Continue, Leo," Dominic said, picking up the espresso. Leo shifted his weight, looking distinctly uncomfortable speaking in front of her. "The guy from the alley. His name is Trent Miller. Low-level muscle for the South Side betting rings. But that's not the problem." Dominic took a sip of the dark coffee. He didn't look at Leo. He was looking at Chloe, watching her reaction to the name of the man who had terrified her. She kept her face completely blank, digging her short fingernails into her palms. "The problem is his uncle," Leo continued, his voice dropping. "Captain Gregory Miller, Vice Division, 14th Precinct." The air in the office seemed to thin. Chloe knew the 14th Precinct. It covered the district where several of Russo Holdings' commercial warehouses were located. "Captain Miller has been leaning on the dock managers at the Navy Pier shipments," Leo said. "He's citing zoning violations, fire code infractions, standard shakedown. He's demanding a 30% increase in the monthly permit fees. When the managers told him to take it up with corporate, he laughed. He said to tell Dominic Russo that the price of doing business in his city just went up." Chloe watched Dominic's face. It was entirely impassive. There was no flash of anger, no sudden tightening of the jaw, but the silence that followed Leo's words was suffocating. "Trent Miller," Dominic said slowly, placing the empty espresso cup back on the silver tray. "The nephew." "Yes, boss. Trent was drinking at the Neon Moth on Friday, celebrating. Uncle Greg promised him a cut of the new warehouse kickbacks." The pieces clicked together in Chloe's mind with sickening clarity. The man in the alley hadn't just been a random drunk. He was the arrogant, insulated relative of a corrupt police captain trying to extort the Russo syndicate. And Dominic had nearly run him over. Dominic finally broke eye contact with Chloe and looked at Leo. "Bring me the ledgers for the 14th precinct payouts, the ones dating back to 2023. I want every dime we've handed Captain Miller documented. Boss, you're not thinking of paying the increase?" Leo asked, frowning. "No," Dominic said. The word was soft, but it carried the finality of a closing vault door. "I'm thinking of dismantling him." He looked back at Chloe. "You handle the internal routing for the commercial property taxes, correct?" Chloe swallowed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Yes, Mr. Russo. I organize the spreadsheets before they go to accounting. Then you know how to read the municipal code logs?" Dominic said. "It wasn't a question. I want you to pull the public zoning records for Captain Miller's private residences, the one in Lincoln Park and the lake house in Michigan. Cross-reference the purchase dates with the dates of the municipal permit approvals for our Navy Pier warehouses." Leo stared at Dominic, then at Chloe, utter shock registering on his heavy features. "Boss, you want her looking at the books?" "She already organizes my life, Leo. She can organize this." Dominic didn't look away from Chloe. "Can you do it?" It was a test. He was pulling her out of the negative space, out of the safe, quiet bubble of administrative duties, and handing her a shovel to dig up dirt on a corrupt police captain. He was showing her exactly what he did. Chloe looked at the dark, unreadable depths of his eyes. She thought about the heavy, terrifying hand of Trent Miller on her wrist. She thought about Frank sitting outside her apartment, a symptom of the world she had accidentally tripped into. There was no going back to the way things were. "I'll have the cross-referenced files on your desk by noon," Chloe said. Her voice didn't shake. Dominic's lips twitched, a microscopic, terrifying hint of a smile. Good. The work was tedious, requiring absolute focus. Chloe sat at her desk, entirely ignoring the ringing phones and the emails piling up in her inbox. She had 2 monitors pulled up. On the left, the public property records for Gregory Miller. On the right, the internal financial logs of Russo Holdings' commercial division. It took her 3 hours to find the pattern. Captain Miller wasn't just taking cash envelopes for looking the other way on zoning infractions. He was systematically using shell companies to buy up the condemned properties directly adjacent to Russo's planned development sites, mere days before the city council, influenced by Miller's safety reports, approved the rezoning. He was forcing the syndicate to buy the adjacent land from him at triple the market value to proceed with their builds. It was insider trading enforced by a police badge. At 11:45 a.m., Chloe hit print. The heavy laser printer churned out 40 pages of highlighted documentation, deeds, and matching dates. She neatly aligned the stack of paper, slid it into a thick manila folder, and walked to Dominic's office. She pushed the door open. He was alone, standing by the window, a dead phone in his hand. The sky outside was the color of bruised iron. "The files, Mr. Russo," Chloe said, stepping up to his desk and placing the folder precisely in the center of the leather blotter. Dominic turned. He walked over, picked up the folder, and opened it. He didn't sit down. He stood next to her, flipping through the pages. The scent of him, cedar and clean cotton, was distracting. He stopped on page 12, tracing a line of data with his index finger. "A holding company registered in Delaware," Dominic murmured, reading the highlighted text. "Purchased the lots on 43rd Street 2 weeks before we broke ground." "If you look at page 15, Chloe pointed, leaning in slightly. "The registered agent for that holding company shares a home address with Trent Miller." Dominic turned his head. Their faces were inches apart. He looked at the printed page, then at her. The air between them suddenly felt incredibly dense. "You found the paper trail linking the extortion directly to the captain's family assets," Dominic stated. "Yes, it's not just a shakedown for permit fees, it's systemic real estate fraud. If these documents were to end up on the desk of the Internal Affairs Division or the district attorney." Chloe trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Dominic slowly closed the folder. He dropped it onto the desk. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet room. "You are remarkably efficient, Chloe," he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Dominic countered softly, turning his body fully toward her. "Your job is answering my phone and organizing my schedule. This—" He tapped the folder. "This is you helping me ruin a man." Chloe held her ground. She didn't step back. "He's a corrupt officer who uses his badge to steal, and his nephew puts his hands on people who don't want to be touched. I don't feel bad about organizing the paperwork for his ruin." Dominic stared at her. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. He reached out slowly. Chloe didn't flinch. He raised his hand and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed the sensitive skin of her jaw. The touch was electric, a stark contrast to the cold, clinical conversation about blackmail and corruption. "I have a meeting at 2:00, Dominic said, his thumb lingering for a fraction of a second on her cheek before he pulled his hand back. "With Captain Miller. Clear the rest of my afternoon." "Here in the office?" "No, at the site on 43rd Street. It's fitting." "Will you—" Chloe hesitated. She hated the tremor that suddenly appeared in her voice. "Will you be safe?" Dominic looked at her, genuinely surprised by the question. Then a dark, genuine amusement flickered in his eyes. "Chloe," he said softly, leaning down slightly so his eyes were level with hers, "I am the danger in this city, not Gregory Miller. Do not worry about me." He picked up the manila folder and walked past her, out the door. Chloe stood in the quiet office for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. Her jaw still felt warm where his hand had touched her. She had just handed the Mafia boss the loaded gun he needed, and for the first time in her life, she felt entirely, terrifyingly alive. It rained again that evening. A cold, relentless Chicago drizzle that slicked the pavement and made the streetlights bleed on the wet asphalt. At 6 p.m., Chloe was the only person left on the penthouse floor. She had forwarded the phones to the answering service. She was supposed to leave. Frank was waiting in the garage, but she couldn't move. She sat at her desk, staring at the muted television screen mounted on the far wall of the reception area, tuned to the local news. At 6:15 p.m., the private elevator chimed. The heavy steel doors slid open. Dominic stepped out. He didn't look like a CEO returning from a site visit. His charcoal suit jacket was unbuttoned. His tie was loosened, the collar of his white shirt unfastened. His knuckles on his right hand were split and bleeding slightly, staining his pale skin. He stopped when he saw her sitting at her desk. "You're still here," he said. It sounded rough, like he had spent the last hour shouting. Chloe stood up immediately. She didn't look at his face. She looked at his hand. "You're bleeding." Dominic looked down at his knuckles as if he hadn't noticed. "It's nothing. A minor disagreement regarding the terms of Captain Miller's early retirement." He walked toward his office. Chloe followed him instinctively. She bypassed her own desk and went straight to the small mahogany supply closet in the hallway. She opened it, retrieved the heavy white first aid kit she had stocked on her second day of work, and walked into his office. Dominic was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the rain. He had taken off his suit jacket and tossed it onto the leather sofa. Chloe walked up to him. She didn't ask for permission. She opened the plastic latch of the kit, pulled out an antiseptic wipe, and reached for his right hand. Dominic tensed slightly, but he let her take his hand. His palm was calloused, his fingers thick and heavy. Chloe's hands looked incredibly small holding his. She tore open the square packet. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the space between them. "This is going to sting," she murmured. "I've had worse," he replied, his voice completely flat. She pressed the wet wipe to the split skin over his knuckles. Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just looked down at the top of her head, watching the careful, precise movements of her hands. "Did he agree to the terms?" Chloe asked quietly, wiping away the small smears of crimson. "He didn't have a choice," Dominic said. The vibration of his voice traveled down his arm and into her hands. "The documents you compiled were flawless. He transfers the deeds of the adjacent lots back to Russo Holdings tomorrow morning. He files his retirement papers by Friday. If he attempts to contact the licensing board or the zoning commission, the folder goes to the DA. And his nephew." Chloe stopped wiping. She held his hand, looking up at his face. Dominic's eyes were pitch black in the dim light of the office. "Trent Miller has decided to relocate to Florida. Indefinitely. He boarded a bus an hour ago." Chloe let out a slow, shaky breath. The heavy, suffocating fear that had been sitting on her chest since Friday night finally fractured and dissolved. Trent was gone. The corrupt captain was neutralized. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me, Chloe," Dominic said harshly, pulling his hand away from her grip. The sudden loss of contact felt like a physical drop in temperature. "I didn't do it out of the goodness of my heart. I did it because they threatened my assets, both my property and my personnel." He turned away from her, walking toward his desk. He braced his hands on the heavy mahogany edge, leaning his weight on his arms, his back to her. "You should go home," he said, not looking at her. "Frank is waiting. Tomorrow you go back to organizing the ledgers. You go back to brewing the coffee. You forget what happened today." He was trying to rebuild the wall. He was trying to push her back into the negative space. A week ago, Chloe would have nodded, packed her bag, and disappeared. But the woman who had cowered in the alley was gone. The woman who had dismantled a police captain's finances over a lunch break had taken her place. Chloe closed the first aid kit with a sharp snap. She set it down on the glass coffee table. She walked across the thick carpet. Her heels made no sound. She stopped directly behind him. She was close enough to feel the heat radiating off his broad back, close enough to smell the damp wool of his trousers and the faint metallic tang of the blood she had just cleaned. "No," Chloe said. Dominic froze. The muscles in his back locked rigid. He slowly turned his head, looking over his shoulder at her. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and a dark, rising intensity. "Excuse me," he murmured softly. "I said no," Chloe repeated, her voice steady, anchored by a newfound gravity. "I'm not forgetting today, and I'm not going back to being invisible. You pulled me into this, Dominic." She used his name again. Deliberately this time. It felt heavy and right on her tongue. Dominic turned fully around to face her. He didn't step back. He stepped into her space, crowding her, forcing her to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. "You don't know what you're asking for," he warned, his voice a gravelly whisper. "You saw the paperwork today. You didn't see what happened at the construction site. You don't want to know the man who throws the punch, Chloe. You only want the man who holds the umbrella." "I know exactly who you are," Chloe countered, refusing to back down. "I saw the holster on my first day. I see the men who walk into this office. I know what you do. But I also know you came for me when I called." She reached out. Her hand trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. She placed her palm flat against the center of his chest, right over his heart. The steady, heavy rhythm beat against her fingers. "You don't get to protect me and then pretend I don't exist," she said quietly. Dominic stared down at her. The rigid control he maintained over every aspect of his life, his syndicate, his city, began to crack. He looked at her hand resting on his chest, claiming space, claiming him. With a ragged exhale, he reached up and gripped her wrist. He didn't pull her hand away. He slid his fingers down, interlocking them with hers, holding her hand tightly against his heart. "If you stay in the light," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a rough, broken murmur. "If you step over this line, I will not let you walk back into the shadows. You belong to me, in every sense of the word. Do you understand what that means?" Chloe looked at the dark, lethal man standing in front of her. She thought about the cage of glass and steel, and she realized it wasn't a prison. It was a fortress, and she was standing on the wall beside him. "I understand," she breathed. Dominic didn't say another word. He let go of her hand, moved his hands to either side of her face, and pulled her in. The kiss was not gentle. It was urgent, heavy, and desperate, carrying the weight of a week of terrifying restraint. It tasted of dark coffee and absolute possession. Chloe gasped against his mouth, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, anchoring herself in the storm she had finally chosen to weather. The quiet assistant had disappeared completely, leaving only the woman who held the city's most dangerous man entirely in her hands. Thank you for listening to the complete audio drama of His Shy Assistant. If Chloe and Dominic's journey from the quiet shadows of a corporate office to the dangerous, thrilling reality of the Chicago syndicate kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button right now. Share this video with your fellow romance readers who crave stories about power, protection, and the lines we cross for the people we claim. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next full-length story.